I think that's a great idea. We're actually talking to the state DMV about changing their driver's test so that there are more questions pertaining to bicycling, so people start noticing bikes. You know, one of the interesting things about Velib and Paris and about bike share around the world is that the more cyclists are on the street, the safer it becomes. About every time you triple the number of cyclists, you're halving the crash rate. And that's because of that very notion that motorists become accustomed to looking over their shoulder every time they turn because there's likely to be a bicyclist
and
there.
Don't forget about those doors. You got to watch those parked cars, bikers. You think you're going to get hit by the moving vehicle, you're really going to get hit by the parked one as the driver is getting out of the car and you don't expect it, which is actually probably the main reason for wanting the raised barriers, because that's really what the barrier separates you from as much as anything. It's the lane of parked cars, isn't it?
Absolutely. You're not riding in the door zone anymore.
Scott in Harrison used the bike share program much closer to home than Paris or Barcelona. Hi, Scott.
Hi. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I actually got to use it twice before they stopped the program in Princeton. People said, "Oh boy, free bikes," and they took the bikes and they spray painted them and they ripped off whatever identification, and we never saw them again. So what's going to stop that here in New York City?
There's no crime in New York City anymore. Didn't you know that?
Excuse me.
Well, actually, even in Paris, where they have built some accountability into the system, where the system knows who you are, and when you return a bike, there's a docking mechanism, so it locks itself. It's a bit of trial and error. They're learning how to insulate the system from theft, and I think we're already learning those lessons. In Denver, they just signed a contract to start a bike share in Denver, and the docking stations they're using there are very secure. So hopefully these new systems are solving that problem.
So when the state and the city are in the middle of a budget crisis, how is a bike sharing program even feasible financially?
Well, I think the first thing to point out is that in terms of the investment required to make this happen, it's really a fraction of the cost that we currently pay for other transit projects that are serving about the same number of riders. I mean, Second Avenue Subway, $2 billion per mile to build that. I mean, the capital cost for doing bike share in New York, for what city planning outlined, 10,000 bikes roughly. We're talking about $30 to $40 million in capital costs and maybe about 18 to 20 million ongoing. A lot of that, the majority of that, could be paid with corporate sponsorships, as other cities are doing, and also user fees, charging a modest fee. As your caller said, in Paris, it's about €30 for annual subscription, and then it's free for the first half hour, and then maybe $1 or $2 an hour after that. So really, it's possible to fund this on the cheap, and the stations are getting less expensive all the time. Instead of digging into the street and wiring everything, it's possible now, as Montreal is doing with their Bixby system, to use solar and wireless technology. So you're just sort of planting the station there.
And what would the fee be? What do other cities charge the users per use?
It's about $40 to $60 per year. And
so you buy a 1-year kind of unlimited bike share pass.
Well, it's not unlimited use. What you're buying is the right to use the system. And then every time you take a bike out, check a bike out, your first half hour is free, and then you incur a charge for every half hour after that.
Since you're with Transportation Alternatives, let me ask you a big picture question, because I know the city has had a bicycle master plan for over 10 years now, and of course the lanes do seem to be springing up everywhere these days. There's a lot of progress. I discovered one. You already knew about this, I'm sure, but I just recently discovered a great bike lane that starts in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx and goes north, completely separated from traffic. It's near the Henry Hudson, but it's not on it. Completely separated from traffic, goes across the county line into Westchester and up much further than I took it. So there's one great one, but supposedly it would include something like 1,800 miles of bike lanes around the 5 boroughs, and then Mayor Bloomberg promised to add an additional 200 miles. So where are we currently at with the master bike plan?
Well, right now, the city is not planning to complete those 1,800 miles until the year 2030. And we're going to be too old to bike around by then. So we need to accelerate that timeline and recognize that for average people to start bicycling, we need these kinds of protected lanes, like you said, near Van Cortlandt Park. We need those lanes everywhere so that people can link up their destinations wherever they're going. So really, it's an opportunity with bike share to do both of these things simultaneously, where you're building the infrastructure, but you're also making it much easier for people people to actually hop on these public bikes and discover how easy and convenient and cheap it is to ride. In Paris, over 60% of users of this system are citing affordability as their main reason for doing it.
And the news that prompted us to have this conversation today was the revelation of the existence of a feasibility study. I think they're not even really talking about it publicly yet. But now we know that this feasibility study is being circulated in the Bloomberg administration. They say it's still in the early planning stages. So what do you think is the next step or a realistic timeline?
Well, I think that, as you point out, other agencies and the mayor's office are looking at the study. I think it's emerging as a great example of how city government can work, where one agency does a terrific study and the other agencies are talking to each other, talking about how they can link up and make it happen. I think one key stat that's going to enable everyone to embrace this is that there was a recent Department of Health survey that discovered that 9% of New Yorkers are already riding their bikes a few times a month.